Hello everyone. Today we are doing a rather different video. As good as I am at Star Wars Battlefront, I am much better at political science. We're going to be predicting the 2024 election. So in 2016 and 2020, I got 50 out of 51 correct in each election. 51 because DC gets electoral votes, of course. Made quite a lot of money betting on those elections. So we're doing it again. This time I'm going to do a YouTube video explaining my predictions. And we are 5 months out. This is not my final prediction. I will do a follow-up video the day of the election. I'll upload it before the first votes are counted. And that prediction should be even more confident than this one. So looking at this map, the first thing you'll notice is the level of confidence I have. And that's because of the hyper-partisan environment that we currently live in. Trump supporters and Biden supporters are very stubborn. Not a lot of people are changing their minds. Even if a president does something objectively horrible or objectively great, the opinion polls will not budge one bit at all. So, yeah, it's pretty hyper-partisan. Support for each candidate has been fairly consistent over the last 4 years, though Trump has gained some ground slowly over that time. I'm forecasting, for starters, that the popular vote will be somewhere between +5 for Trump and +5 for Biden. That's a very narrow 10% range that we have. Usually the range is going to be much wider at this stage, but I can predict that there's really only going to be 10% variation in that. It's going to be a pretty predictable election. This is roughly the same level of confidence I would have on the day of the election. If a prediction with the colors like this level of dark blue, this level of dark red, that's how confident I was going into 2016 and 2020 on the day of the election. I am this confident 5-6 months out. So that should say a lot about just how predictable and stable the country really is, at least in terms of political support for the candidates. So, what do these colors mean? The dark red means that I am 100% certain that Trump is going to win. Same with the dark blue. I'm 100% certain Biden will win those states. The red that you see here in North Carolina and the blue you see in Minnesota and Maine, that's more like a 90 to 100% sure. That means I'm pretty damn confident, but there is some room to be wrong. We will see, but I'm pretty confident on who will win those states. The pink shade that you see is more like I'm somewhere between a 50 and 90% sure, which is kind of a large range, but I didn't really feel like differentiating the colors more than that. And then the very light blue that you see on Nevada and New Hampshire, those are states that I truly do believe are toss-up states. They're 50-50. I'm just I wouldn't say arbitrarily, but I'm just throwing them to Biden because I don't want this to be a map with toss-ups. If you really forced me to choose a candidate, I would go with Biden, but Trump could just as easily win. And the reason I'm going with Biden for these is for very intangible reasons that I'm not even really going to go into. But so here, these are states that I'm going to explain. Everything in yellow are states that I'm going to explain in detail why I believe a candidate will win that state. So all these tan states, all these blank states, I mean, they're pretty obvious. If you know anything about elections in the United States, you know that Trump has zero chance in Illinois, and you know Biden has zero chance in Oklahoma. I feel like all these are pretty safe. With that said, polls have shown a closer than usual race in New York and New Jersey, but even so, that's just statistical noise. Ignore that. I'm very confident about that. Polls also show Alaska being close. Polls in Alaska always show that. And to be fair, Alaska has been trending a bit blue lately. It's not going to go for Biden in an election, especially one where his best case scenario is he wins by 5%. So, yeah, really all these states I'm just 100% confident on. These are states, or the yellow states are, for some of these I am 100% confident on. For instance, Texas, I am 100% certain Trump will win. I will go into why later. The polls do show a closer race right now. Actually, they don't. I'm going to go into that later once again. But a lot of people are not as confident as me about Texas. So I'm going to explain why that split exists and why you really should be more certain about a Republican victory here. Same with Florida, I'm very confident about. Ohio, Iowa. These are ones where if you look at the betting odds, some people are betting for the Democrats, and I don't think that's really justified. So I'm going to explain why that's wrong. But yeah, the yellow are just states I'm going to go into, basically. So we have several tabs open here. One's for 2016 election, one is for 2020. And you'll note that this map is very similar to the 2016 election. Well, it's literally the 2016 election with, 306 to... See, because... Okay, wait. There's actually one thing off here, because... Oh. Yeah, it's 306 to 232. It's because there were electoral vote changes. Some states gained some states lost some. But even though Trump is winning one less electoral here in Nebraska, he's still getting 306 as he did in 2016. Sorry, that confused me for a second. I was like, shouldn't Trump be at 307 or 305 because the Nebraska thing? But then I remembered the map changes. Sorry about that. Anyway, I'm sorry if that was confusing. Whatever. Moving on. So national, look at the polls. Who's ahead in the national polls? Trump is ahead by 1% right now. Yeah, he's ahead by 1%. And he's been kind of fluctuating between, let's see, what was his low? 0.7, and his high was like a 1.1 recently. At least since, let's see, the past month. What has he been at? He had a 1.2 very briefly. So he's been... Oh, he had a 0.3 in the 23rd. But he's been ahead in 538's averages ever since they launched the average. One thing you always have to watch out for, and this is something Nate Silver has really been the largest peddler of, and he's very right. He's very correct. It's hurting in polls. You want to watch out for that. And if you look at the results right now, even though we're 6 months out, you see a lot of hurting. Statistically speaking, if a lot of polls should be showing Trump +5, a lot of polls should be showing Trump or Biden +5. There should be a lot of more variation in the polls. The fact that we aren't seeing that is an anomaly. That means that people are putting their thumbs on the scales. Pollsters are reluctant to publish polls that are wildly outside of the average. With that said, there is a small consensus that Trump is ahead, and he has been for quite a while. And show more polls. Ignore anything with Kennedy in it. Kennedy might actually break 5%, which would be interesting. But he's obviously not going to win. But yeah, Trump's been consistently ahead for a while, and actually 2.4%. You saw him peak at like a 2.4% lead. Yeah, but this is all just statistical noise. There's really been no meaningful fluctuation in any of these candidates' support since 538 launched their average. So some macro things you need to understand about the election. Trump lost the popular vote in the past two elections. In 2016, it was by 2.09%, I believe, and in 2020, it was by 4.45%. And despite losing the popular vote in 2016, he won the Electoral College, and the tipping point state was Wisconsin, which Trump won by 0.77, I believe, if memory serves. Sorry, it's been a few years. 2016, 0.77. Yep, I was right. In 2020, the tipping point state was Wisconsin again, and this time Trump lost by 0.63. These are incredibly small margins, and if you know anything about tipping point state theory, then basically that means if Trump had performed nationally by 0.63%, so the conjecture goes he would have won Wisconsin, and he would have won all the states that were even closer than Wisconsin, and he thus would have won the election. These 37 electoral votes get added to Trump's 232 would have gotten him to 269, which would have led to a contingency election, which in turn would have led to Trump being elected, because if you know how contingency elections work, the Republicans have an edge in that. And it would have been very certain Trump would have won in the case of an electoral vote tie, although it would have been a massive clusterfuck, very controversial, but Trump would have won. So I also want to note that such a tie cannot happen this time. If Trump were to win all of the 2020 states on top of Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona, which he came very close to winning these three last time, then he would win outright. There would be no contingency election due to the population growth in various red states, namely Texas, right here in Florida. They've grown. North Carolina also got an electoral vote. There's been some shrinkage as well, but all in all, the red states have grown more than they've shrunk. Like Ohio used to be bigger. So that's the macro landscape we're dealing with. Trump has enjoyed an electoral college edge in the past few elections. He could lose the popular vote and still win the electoral college. We see even now in the polls, he seems to have some sort of popular vote. Well, first off, he's ahead in the popular vote, but he seems to have an electoral college edge as well on top of that. So, for instance, at 1 point ahead in the polls, if we go down to Wisconsin right here, he's 2.6 ahead, which that's not as big as the previous advantages he enjoyed, which were 2.86 and it was minus 6. 3.79. Those were the advantages he enjoyed before. Now it's looking more like a 1 to 2 point edge. And keep in mind, we're talking about a very small sample size of polls for Wisconsin. None of the swing states have been polled a particularly large amount. It is still early. But even so, you kind of see what seems to be a smaller edge. It should also be noted that Trump has outperformed his polling averages in the prior two elections. Republicans have not outperformed in 2022, the midterms. So the idea of shy Trump voters is a very dubious and tenuous theory at best. With that stated, Donald Trump, he does just seem to outperform his polls. And we have two elections now where he performed them by a substantial margin, especially in 2020. He outperformed them by such a large amount that I think if you'd probably want to bet on him doing it again. He wasn't on the ballot in 2022, so if the shy Trump voter effect could still be real. I'm not necessarily saying that's the reason why he outperforms. It might just be due to polling methodology and techniques being more biased towards urban people, for instance, and just worse at catching Republicans in their net. And there's also increasing distrust of pollsters these days, which unfortunately, see, it's kind of like a Tinkerbell effect. If you believe it, it becomes real. If you believe the polls are inaccurate, you therefore do not answer polls. Therefore, polls become inaccurate. But even so, we see Trump continuing to have a electoral college edge. So as things would stand, he could lose the popular vote by 1.6%, and he would still be favored in Wisconsin. You would have the same Arizona. He's ahead by quite a bit. Colorado, they do not have an average yet, although we could get a rough guesstimate of an average. Florida, 10 points ahead. Yeah, it's looking bad for the Democrats in Florida. We'll get into that later. But we're just having a macro view of the election for now. Pennsylvania, where is Pennsylvania? There it is. 1.8. Yeah. Yeah. And you see herding in the state polls too. You should see more variation. Another very important thing I want to mention is if we were to assume Wisconsin was the tipping point state for a third time in a row, which isn't likely, but if it were, we should also note that Trump has outperformed his polls in Wisconsin by a very large margin. In the 2016 election, there wasn't a single major poll leading up to the election that had Trump leading in Wisconsin. He ultimately ended up winning. The final average had him down by 6.5% on 538's average. In 2020, he was down by like 8 or 9 points. And there was one particular poll by, I believe it was a collaboration poll between ABC and the Washington Post. They had Trump down by 15 points. And if you ask me, that's just malpractice. He ultimately lost by less than 1%. And indeed, if there's even a slight argument to be made that if the polls had shown a tighter race in Wisconsin, GOP Republicans would have been more incentivized to vote. But of course, that would also lead to some Democrats being more incentivized to vote. But you'd probably have seen a higher turnout all in all. And who knows how that could have affected the race. But yeah, Trump has a history of outperforming his Wisconsin polls in particular by very large margins, as well as his Pennsylvania polls by a slightly lesser extent. So let's say Trump outperforms his polls again by, 2 points, which is actually kind of mild. He outperforms by 2 points. Then you would probably expect him to outperform his Wisconsin polls by 4 or even more points. He could outperform them potentially by 6 or 7 even. In 2020, he did so. He outperformed them by 8 or 9 points. I don't remember the exact averages in 2020. I do remember 2016, though. In 2020, he outperformed them very substantially, and it almost cost me a state because I picked Biden to win Wisconsin in 2020, and I was almost wrong. And I picked him to win by 8%, 8.1%, and instead he won by 0.63. So, yeah, I almost got the state outright wrong. The only state I got wrong last time was Georgia, by the way. And if you know anything about elections, you know why I got Georgia wrong. So let's go state by state now. We're going to start with Nevada. In Nevada, let's see here. What are the polls looking like at old Nevada? So the thing about Nevada that it's very important to understand this. The polls in Nevada historically are very off. They'll underestimate one candidate or the other by a very substantial margin. Nevada is what I would call a true swing state. It is the purest and most true swing state of them all. Now, Democrats have a 4-election winning streak there, but even so, just remember that Las Vegas has a very fluid population. A lot of people go in and out. A lot of people are not necessarily permanent residents there, and they'll leave by the next summer or much sooner, and yet they vote in Nevada, and their votes could count as a Nevada vote for one reason or another. Yeah, Nevada is just weird like that, and the number of people who will live in Las Vegas for 4 or more years, the distance between elections, it's not a lot. There's not a lot of people who will live in the Vegas area for 4 or more years. It's in a constant state of flux, and ultimately, Democrats and Republicans seem to like to gamble at the same rates. So as a result, Nevada's always just there's swings that will favor one party or the other that are very seasonal, and it's kind of hard to predict often. Nevada does have some early voting data that's been useful for predicting in the past, and I will be looking into that as the election progresses. And when I make my final predictions, that'll be factored in. For now, you have Trump ahead by 5 points. I don't think that'll hold. That's abnormal. It's for Trump to be ahead more in Nevada than he is in Wisconsin is definitely a fluke. And also, once again, we are talking about a small number of polls. These are small sample sizes. Eventually, I do expect Trump to perform worse in Nevada. With that said, anecdotally, I could say casino goers tend to be a little bit more. What's the term? Angry voters. They tend to be more angry voters, and they tend to vote more from a visceral place, the same place that they used to gamble. So there's going to be more of a reaction against the incumbent administration than with other voters. And indeed, from gamblers I've spoken to, people who go to the slot machines, they seem to favor Trump thus far. I have some connections in Vegas, but even so, I am actually I colored Nevada ever so slightly blue. This is not my final prediction, and I am very comfortable making this like even a dark red, a dark red, if it's still Trump plus 5% on election day, if that's the polls. So, but for now, I'm just gonna bet on reversion to the mean, and for Democrats to have a slight edge there, as they've tended to enjoy. And just keep in mind, Nevada is always going to be a very close state because gamblers are almost always 50-50 Democrat and Republican. They're equally degenerate people. So, yeah, Nevada, it's always going to be a close state. 100 years from now, it'll be a close state unless something weird goes on. So, let's remove Nevada. Now we have Arizona. Let's get to the polls here in Arizona. This is a state has become blue very rapidly. Yeah. But even so, you see Trump with a 3.2% lead here right now. So in 2016, Arizona was won by just 3.5%. In 2020, it was won by 0.31 by the Democrats. So, let's see, 2 points. Let me do some quick math here. 2.36 nationwide swing versus a 3.81% swing in Arizona. That means a 1 point. Sorry, give me a second. 3.81 minus 2.06, 2.06, 1.75, I believe. It's a 1.75% trend towards the Democrats. Sorry if my head math is a bit wrong there. So, and if you need introduction to trend, basically is like Florida, even though Biden won by a larger margin than Clinton, in Florida, we see that Trump won by a larger margin than he did in 2016. So as a result, we say Florida trended Republican by quite a lot. It trended Republican. This is different from swing because, say, I don't know, New Hampshire, 7.35%. In 2016, it was very, very close. It was a more than 5% trend towards the Democrats because it swung more heavily than the nation. So trend versus swing. If you don't know what these mean, if I didn't explain it properly, now's the time to look up those terms because I don't want to explain it better than that. So yeah, Arizona's been trending blue. It's been trending blue. And this seems to be a little bit premature. It's been trending blue at a faster rate than the Latino growth in the state. And also, Latinos don't seem to be trending blue themselves. If anything, they seem to have become more conservative as time has gone on. And I was writing a paper on that called Demographic Equilibrium Theory, about how certain minority groups will inevitably eventually meet the national average, well, at least immigrant ones. They'll eventually reach the national average for one reason or another, especially if they are capable of assimilating, as Hispanics have shown to be able to do. An increasing percent of them identify as white, which is interesting. So eventually, being Hispanic will be as meaningless as identifying as Italian, and their voting patterns will eventually match that of Italians. So the overall point, though, is Arizona has been trending blue at a faster rate than the Latino growth in the state, which is abnormal. That means that the only reason why Biden won Arizona at all, really, was because he flipped some white voters. You probably cannot expect that to hold in this election. So you would expect Arizona to flip back to red, if anything, and you'd expect for there to be some reverses in the Democrats' gains, as it wasn't sustainable. Their win in Arizona came a little bit prematurely, and it is a sign of things to come. It is a sign of Arizona becoming more of a purple state, and it is a sign of Arizona becoming more competitive and just less red. But it was clearly not a sustainable thing. The Democrats were not going to repeat this easily, because once again, the trend from 2016 to 2020 was larger than the Hispanic growth, meaning something fluky went on that's not sustainable. So I am coloring it as a pink state. There is some room for Democrats to win here. I'll give you a rough guesstimate of something like a 75 to 80% chance of a Republican victory here. Okay, so we got that one out of the way. Now we move on to Colorado. Now, Colorado was 9 points more Democrat than the national average. It was still within single digits of the national average, but even so, it was not particularly close, and they ultimately won by 13 points there. All the polls have Biden ahead right now. The closest one had him ahead by just 4. That actually would kind of match a Trump victory by, say, 5%, which I said was on the table. If Trump won the popular vote by 5%, then Colorado would be within 5 points itself, and it would kind of look like a light blue state. If we're going into election day and Trump has a 5% lead, he has a 5% lead, and then he outperforms his polls, and there's also a reversion from Colorado's previous trends, and there's some additional backlash exclusive to Colorado towards Biden. That even then, Biden would win Colorado by a point or two. That's why Colorado is dark blue, and I live here ultimately, and I could tell you Colorado, it's a dark blue state. It's filled with Democrats. The Democrats are going to win here. New Mexico is it actually has not trended much at all, and it trended by 2 points towards the Democrats in the 2020 election, but before then it was actually roughly the same spot it was in 2008. All in all, it's only trended about 2% towards the Democrats since 2008, and it's always been within 10 points of the national average. And Republicans obviously won here in 2004, and they came very close, they came very close to winning in 2000. It was some ridiculously small margin by like 300 votes or something. They lost. So New Mexico is far from a deep blue state, but it's also a pretty safe state. The Democrat support here has been fairly stable, even in, once again, a situation where Trump is winning the popular vote by 5%. New Mexico is just out of reach. So it's a dark blue. I'm very certain Biden will pull through here. I am 100% certain. I am not sure about the margin. It could be very close. New Mexico and Colorado could both be within 2 points, but that would be really pushing Trump's luck if it's within 2 points in these two states. Um, I would also note that Colorado has historically been the more conservative of the two, but recently it has surpassed New Mexico, which is interesting. It would be interesting to see like a Republican landslide at some point in the upcoming elections and see New Mexico go red, but Colorado stay blue. That would be very interesting to see just this in a sea of red. But that's not going to happen this election. It could happen in a future election if there's a Republican president who's very popular and going for re-election in, I don't know, 2032 or something. Um, but it's not happening this time. Going to take these two off the board. Now we have Texas. And Texas was exactly 10% more Republican than the national average. Last time, Trump only won by, it was actually 10.03%. He won by 5.58. He lost the national popular vote by 4.45. Compare this to 2016, it was 8.99. So in 2016, Texas was 12.8% more. And then 2020, it was 10.03. So that's a 2.05% trend towards the Democrats. If that holds, then Texas will be like 8% more Republican than the national average, even in a scenario where Biden is winning the popular vote by 5%, which just seems unlikely at this point. Even if he matches his 2020 performance, he's only going to get kind of sort of close in Texas. Like Texas will be within 3 or 4 points. It'll be within. But there's no scenario where he outright wins the state. Biden's not winning in a landslide. I'm sorry if you think he is, but he's not going to. So we could safely put Texas as a red state. I could consider it very probable that Trump actually wins here by double digits. I don't think Texas is going to continue its trend. Once again, I think this is an election where, especially Hispanic heavy states, some of the trends we've been seeing are going to slightly reverse, at least temporarily, for this election. Simply on account of the fact it was kind of unsustainable. For Texas to have swung by 2 points was actually kind of overly fast for the state, and it's not going to hold. And I think you're going to have heightened Republican turnout in the state this year, just as a show of support, as an emphasis that Texas is still a red state, and it's going to remain so for the near-term future. It's not a swing state yet. I think the earliest it could be in play, or the earliest it could end up being more Democrat than the national average would be like 2036. For now, it's going to remain more Republican than the national average, and by at least 5%, if not more than 10%, for this election at least. But if you go by the trend from 2016 to 2022, it'll be 8% more Republican, and that's still more than enough for Trump to win. So, taking Texas off the board now. Now we have Nebraska, the 2nd congressional district. This has Omaha in it, which is increasingly a large city, so it's going to favor Democrats. And we see a pretty large trend. So, something like a 4 or 5 point trend towards the Democrats between 2016 and 2020, and there's a similarly large trend in from 2012 to 2016. So Omaha has been trending blue for quite a while now. I think there's some Republican bills in motion to make Nebraska be winner take all once again, which it would make quite a lot of sense given Omaha's status in the state. Um, I'm going to assume it continues its blue trend, and even in a race where Trump is winning the popular vote by say 1 or 2%, and even in a race where Trump is where there is no further trend to the left, even then Omaha's probably going to be blue. But there's reason to believe that suburban areas are swinging back towards Trump. With that said, Omaha being red again is not out of the question. I would consider this something like an 80% Democrat win. I will be much more confident come November. The big issue with this is that there's no polls from Nebraska, from the congressional district. I'm sure there's polls from Nebraska. Let's see. That's weird. +3, +3. Dan Osborne. Uh-huh. Okay. Kennedy. It's hilarious. Nebraska's safe. And Omaha, who really knows? We're not going to have any real polling out of that place. And any polling that you do see is highly unreliable and suspect. So stay away from it. Omaha is going to be very difficult to predict. And ultimately, even on election day, I might not be supremely confident. I'll only, if it's still like a 50-50 race in the popular vote in November, I'm probably going to have Omaha be this color. And if it's a Trump leaning election, like he's ahead by 3% or so, then I'm probably gonna have Omaha like right here. If Biden's ahead, if he's comfortably ahead, Omaha's dark blue. For now, I'm leaving it as it's something like an 80% Biden, so it's getting the light blue treatment. Then we have Iowa. I kind of feel like I don't need to explain why Iowa is so dark red. The polls show it being closer than it actually is. Iowa. Selzer. Gold standard right here. This is the best pollster out of any state. And it's a shame that they only poll Iowa, because Iowa's not even a swing state anymore. But trust me, whatever Selzer says is what's going to happen. Trust Selzer more than anything else. Whatever Selzer says, you believe them blindly without second guessing and without a question. If on November 5th Selzer releases a poll that says Kennedy's gonna win Iowa, it means Kennedy's gonna win Iowa. Okay, it's just the truth. They have Trump ahead by 15, and I'm very certain that'll hold. It was more than 10% GOP in 2020 and 2016. It was double digit more Republican than the rest of the nation. So, yeah, Iowa's pretty safe. And you know what? Ohio, it's the same story with Ohio, just to a slightly lesser extent. Let's go to some interesting states. The ones down here, these are fun. Florida. In Florida, the Democrats have had a rather horrid turnout operation going on, and they've just been having horrible luck registering people. It should also be noted that this is the most rapidly aging state in the nation. People are getting old, and they retire in Florida, and then they vote Republican because they're old. You see Trump ahead by 10.2. This lines up well with DeSantis' recent 18% victory. This lines up with Trump being ahead by 1 point in the popular vote. He lost by 5.5. Or he lost by 4.5 last time. So that's a 5.5 swing towards him versus 2020. Add 5.5 to Florida in 2020, and you have 8.8. So a 10.2 is not too far off. Add the fact that Florida's just been trending red for a while. Yeah, it makes sense for Florida to be a double-digit red state this time around. Even in a situation where Biden is winning by 5%, you could still expect Trump to be winning Florida by at least 2 or 3 points, if not more. Even in a situation where Biden's winning by 10 points, there's a possibility he loses Florida. and that's not going to happen. He's not going to win by 10 points. Sorry to burst your bubble, people who think he will. It's not going to happen. So Florida is a dark red state. The growth of old people is far outstripping the growth of Hispanics. People really thought Florida was going to be a blue state eventually because of the Hispanic growth, but they didn't take into account the fact that old white people were also growing in Florida as a share of the population at the cost of black people, really, and young white people who tend to vote Democrat. So as a result, yeah, Florida is going to be a solid red state going forward, and I don't see the trend reversing for any reason that's currently available. One more thing I'd like to add, Cubans are not trending blue as people thought they would. It just wasn't true in 2020. They didn't trend blue. The Cubans of Miami are just as solidly red as ever. Then we have Georgia. Georgia has somehow become less red than Florida and North Carolina, which that's how I ended up getting Georgia wrong in 2020, because really, who could have predicted this? Who could have predicted Georgia would be more blue than Florida? I certainly was not predicting that. Georgia, I'm giving it a light pink because the Democrats do seem to have massively improved their political apparatus in the state. They are turning out black voters in record numbers. Stacey Abrams was obviously a big part of that. Georgia is really the Democrats are nearing their ceiling here. So there's really not much room for them to do even better here. But also, they've set a really high floor for themselves. They are so good at getting people to vote and turning out to vote in this state. So really, I can't do anything better than a light pink. I think even in a scenario where Trump is winning by 5%, Georgia's going to be well within 10 points of the national average, and he's not going to be getting a double-digit win here no matter what. It's a high floor, low ceiling state for the Democrats due to the stable nature of the black population there and their consistently good turnout efforts here. In a 50-50 race, Trump has an edge here, and there's a 99% chance he wins Georgia. In the event of a tied race, it's going to be more Republican than the national average, but also it has been trending Democrat. So maybe there's a bigger jump in the trend, and just maybe, I'm talking 1 in 100 chance that Trump could lose this state despite being roughly even or better in the popular vote. But yeah, Georgia's, I'm leaving it pink. North Carolina is actually redder than Georgia now. It's the same situation as with Florida, except to a much lesser degree. It actually was less red than Florida in the recent 2020 election. And it actually trended slightly blue, but also consistently since 2008, it's been going back and forth between being slightly, or the trend has been exceptionally small, really. We see here in 2020, 1.35 versus 2.66. That's a 2.31% swing. That's almost perfect with the national average. So North Carolina, in other words, it's a very stable state, and it has been for quite a while. There are reasons to believe it will very slowly trend blue, just due to a slightly increasing, but by share of the state's population, a increasing black population. So there is slight reasons to believe it'll trend a little bit blue, but also Republicans don't seem to really be losing a grip here by any stretch yet. So I'm leaving it as a dark red. It's a little bit less confident. It's a little bit less safe for Republicans than Florida. And let's just take a look at the polls out of North Carolina. I'm going to take a wild guess. It's going to say Trump plus 6. 6.5. Okay. I have not seen the polls yet. 6.5. Yep, there we go. Now, with these states out of the way, we can move on to these Rust Belt states up here. Minnesota. In 2016, it was actually more Republican than the national average, which was a shocker. It's the first time it's been more Republican than the national average since the Eisenhower days. It was quite peculiar for this to occur. With that said, that trend was reversed in 2020, and it was reversed by quite a lot. It was 2.66% more. Yeah, 2.66% more Democrat than the national average. That's something like a 3.2 or something ish trend towards the Democrats. It's quite big. It was partially caused by the George Floyd riots. In there's some evidence now that urban dwellers are somewhat abandoning Democrats or trending a little bit more conservative due to various defunding the police measures. For instance, I believe it was San Francisco held some sort of a ballot question that led to more police, led to stricter policing because they tried the other extreme and it didn't work for them. It did not work. I don't know if Minnesota is going through a similar thing, but I imagine the defund the police movement was not popular here. With that said, I still think it's going to be more blue than the national average. And let's just take a look at the polls real quick. It's not the same as its neighbors. It is not Wisconsin, that's for sure. Yeah, Biden's been leading here for quite a while, even with not really having a lead nationally. He's been leading here comfortably. If I had to guess, it'd probably be like a plus 2 or 3% more Democrat than the national average state, same as it was in 2024. Although that doesn't perfectly line up with with all the data I have. Yeah, Minnesota. I'm putting it as this is like an 85% chance of a Democrat win here. I should be more confident one way or the other. I should be more confident of a Democrat victory come November, but maybe Trump will make it interesting here. Then we have Wisconsin and Michigan. Wisconsin is the more red of the two, and I already kind of discussed it. But yeah, Trump has a history of massively outperforming here, and as of right now, he's actually ahead in the polls here. So if he is going to outperform again, he's definitely going to win here. And honestly, I'm probably at about an 80% sure of a Wisconsin victory, or of a Trump victory in Wisconsin. Michigan, I'm more like a 65% sure. Michigan is 2.78. Yeah, it's more blue than Wisconsin. The same was true in 2016, although that to a lesser extent. Yeah, I would say Michigan and Wisconsin are definitely leaning Republican right now. Let's see what the polls out of Michigan are saying. 1.3. Yeah, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I also find it interesting Biden was leading here for even half a second. He still has a chance of winning. He still has a chance of winning. I'm only giving Trump like an 80% chance of winning, so that leaves ample room for Biden to come back. Biden could even potentially win all of these states, which would be a ever so slightly better performance than what he got last time. But because he also has North Carolina, although I do think that unlikely. Okay, so get these off the board. Pennsylvania is in the same boat as Wisconsin. Well, once again, it's in between Michigan and Wisconsin in terms of its redness. So I don't even need to discuss Pennsylvania. And just to be sure, yep, exactly what I thought. In between. But keep in mind there is going to be a herding effect that could be that there's herding in the polls. So yeah, just keep that in mind as well. Virginia. Recently, the Republicans won the gubernatorial election in 2021. That was before Roe was overturned, though. I don't think they'd be able to repeat that today. So Biden being ahead here consistently makes sense. It was some 8 or 9 points more Democrat than the national average last time. Uh, I don't think the Republican governorship was a real. Uh, I mean, it definitely said something, but it does not mean Virginia is going to be a red state anytime soon. It's just not. I do think that there is a chance that it trends right this time, even though it's been trending left for the past few elections. Maybe the governor election was a sign of a trend to the right again, in which case Trump winning by the national vote by 5% plus a slight trend to the right for Virginia means Virginia could be kind of close, but there's just not enough room unless it's a really massive trend for Virginia to be Republican outright, and it's just not going to happen. So Virginia is solid blue in my opinion. Then we have New Hampshire, and let me just fix this real quick. Okay, there we go. It's fixed. Now we move on to New Hampshire, and I cannot even guess what the polls out of New Hampshire are. This is a state that always seems to defy logic. New Hampshire. Biden slightly ahead. You never know which way it's going to trend in any given election. In 2000, it went Democrat, even though the Republicans won the popular vote, but they didn't do so in the previous election. And they won New Hampshire in the prior election. In 2008, it trended blue. In 2012, it trended blue a little bit. In 2016, it trended red massively. In 2020, it trended blue again. It's just back and forth, really. It's just a weird state. It's very swingy. I'm giving the slight edge to the Democrats. That seems to be true right now if you look at the polls. Trump's not led in a single poll yet, but, that doesn't mean much. The same was true of Wisconsin in 2016, and he won Wisconsin, didn't he? So New Hampshire's definitely on the table for him to win. In 2016, it was actually more Republican than the national average. In a 2016 environment, Trump winning by 1% nationally would definitely lead to him winning New Hampshire. It's not 2016 anymore, so who really knows where New Hampshire stands? Because New Hampshire doesn't even know where New Hampshire stands. So, just gonna do that. Then we have Maine, finally, and the Maine 2nd Congressional District. Now, looking at 2020, yeah, it's been trending red for a while. Was it even within 10%? I don't think it was. I don't think it was. It was not within 10% in 2016. Okay. I thought it was at first. Okay, let's see here. Maine 2. Damn. By 10.28 he won. In 2020, obviously, some of that was reversed, but it's still a pretty safe Republican state. Or not state, but area. It's a pretty safe Republican hold, especially if Trump is keeping the popular vote close. Even if he loses by 5 points, Maine's 2nd Congressional District should be comfortably won by him by 5 or more points. Now, Maine as a whole, this is the interesting one. What? Oh, Maine 2nd Congressional. Okay, Kennedy versus Biden. Yeah, Trump's actually led in a statewide poll here, and Biden was only barely ahead in the 1st district, and I believe the RCP had Trump ahead in Maine. But yeah, I'm fairly confident it's going to be a blue state, despite the fact that there was a massive shift to the right in 2016. That was reversed somewhat. I expected to reverse again somewhat, but not by enough for Trump to overcome the advantages Democrats enjoy here. 2016, it was very interesting to see Maine so close. won by just less than 3 points. But then 2020 was by over 9 points. So yeah, Maine's going to be safely blue. So there you go. There's all the states. I've kind of Fermied everything a bit. I love Fermi estimations. Um, but yeah, there you go. We'll see how this map changes. Bye.